I never really thought of myself as the paranoid type, but I guess everyone says that until something actually happens to change their mind. My job at the warehouse usually wraps up around 11 at night, and by the time I get out of there, my head is spinning from the noise and the constant movement of the forklifts. I started going to the local park just to get some silence before heading back to my apartment, thinking it was a safe enough place since it's in a decent part of town. This is the story of why I don't go there anymore, and why I haven't been able to sleep through the night for over a week. The park is pretty basic, just a big loop around a central pond with some playground equipment and a few scattered benches. It was a Tuesday night, I'm almost certain of that, because we'd just finished a big inventory shipment that afternoon. It was abnormally hot for that time of year, probably close to 80 degrees even with the sun being down for hours, and the air just felt thick and heavy. I parked my car in the usual spot under one of the few working streetlights and started my first lap around the water. The only sound was the cicadas and the distant hum of the highway, which was exactly what I needed to clear my head. I was about halfway through my first loop when I saw him for the first time, sitting on a bench near the edge of the pond. It stood out immediately because he was wearing a full, dark suit, complete with a tie and a jacket that looked like it belonged at a funeral or a high-end office. He was sitting perfectly upright, with his hands on his knees, not looking at a phone or even leaning back to relax. He was just staring straight ahead at the empty swing set on the other side of the path, his face completely blank and motionless. I remember thinking he must be roasting in that outfit, given the heat, but he didn't look like he was sweating at all. I kept walking, trying not to stare too hard, because you see some weird stuff in the city at night, and it's usually best to mind your own business. As I passed him, I noticed he didn't even blink or turn his head to acknowledge me, which felt a little bit off-putting. Most people at least give a nod or a quick glance when you walk by them in a deserted area, but it was like I wasn't even there. I told myself he was probably just having a rough night or dealing with some personal stuff and needed the quiet just as much as I did. Still, the way he was positioned was so stiff and unnatural that it made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I finished the first lap and decided to go around one more time, mostly because I didn't want to admit to myself that the guy had spooked me. When I got back toward the area where the bench was, I slowed down a little bit, expecting to see him still sitting there in that same robotic pose. The bench was completely empty, and for a second, I felt a wave of relief wash over me, thinking he'd finally gone home. I scanned the area near the pond, but there was no sign of him on the grass or near the water's edge. I figured he must have walked toward the other exit while I was on the far side of the loop. That relief lasted about 10 seconds until I reached a section of the path that was flanked by a couple of large oak trees. The shadows there were always a bit deeper, and as I approached, I saw something move just behind one of the trunks right next to the walkway. I stopped for a heartbeat, my eyes adjusting, and realized it was the man in the suit, standing perfectly still behind the tree. He wasn't hiding exactly, but he was positioned so that he was only visible once you were almost right on top of him. He was still staring in that same direction, but now he was much closer to where I had to walk. I continued walking without stopping, just in case the person was acting strangely, so I walked around the tree. My focus sharpened, and I felt my body become more alert as I passed. I did not look back, but listened for any sounds behind me. The silence of the area felt stronger than before, and every shadow seemed to be a person in formal wear. When I reached the gravel path, I heard a noise. It wasn't a random noise or an animal moving through the brush. It was the distinct sound of dress shoes hitting the gravel. I took 4 steps, and I heard 4 distinct thuds behind me, perfectly timed with my own footsteps. I slowed down a little bit to see if the sound would continue, and the footsteps behind me slowed down at the exact same rate. It was like I was listening to an echo of my own movement, except the sound was sharper and heavier than my sneakers. I felt a cold chill run down my spine despite the 80-degree heat, and I knew right then that I wasn't just being paranoid. I decided to test it one more time, so I came to a dead stop right in the middle of the path near the old water fountain. The silence that followed was absolute for a split second, and then I heard one final heavy sound as the person behind me stopped too. They did not try to hide it, or act like they were just walking past me. They just stopped exactly when I did. I did not turn around to look because I was scared of what I might see, or that seeing him would make him move faster. I just stood there for a moment, staring at my own shadow on the pavement, trying to figure out how far away my car actually was. I took a deep breath and started walking again, this time much faster, almost at a light jog, as the person behind me immediately picked up the pace, maintaining the exact same distance, maybe 15 or 20 feet. I could hear the rhythm of their footsteps getting louder, as if they were putting more weight into each step now. My car was about 200 yards away, but it felt like it was miles across a desert, and I realized that if I didn't make a break for it now, they were going to catch up to me before I reached the parking lot. I hurried toward the exit with his quick steps following me. I did not look back until I reached the brighter light at the edge of the parking lot. I looked for my keys in my pocket and reached for the door handle. I got into the car and locked the doors, happy to hear the click. I sat for a moment, breathing deeply and holding the steering wheel, before I looked out the window. He was standing at the edge of the road near the park, visible in the streetlight. He was not running, but standing with his arms down, watching my car. As I started to back out, he slowly raised his hands and waved at me. The drive home was a total blur of adrenaline and shaky hands. I kept checking my rearview mirror every 5 seconds, half expecting to see that beat-up sedan or the man himself sitting in my backseat. Every pair of headlights that appeared behind me made my heart jump into my throat, and I took 3 extra turns through random side streets just to make sure I wasn't being followed. I finally pulled into my apartment complex, parked as close to the front entrance as I could, and practically sprinted up the stairs to my unit. I locked the deadbolt, slid the chain across, and sat on the floor with my back against the door for a long time, just listening to the silence of my own hallway. I had trouble sleeping and persistent thoughts. I woke up feeling weary, with achy legs from physical activity. I was concerned about something that happened recently at the stores. I tried to convince myself I was wrong and that the person was just odd or not feeling well. I tried to reassure myself that they were not dangerous, however. They intentionally walked at the same pace as me and moved slowly in the parking area, which seemed deliberate. It felt planned and made me uneasy about what could occur. The next morning, I moved through my routine like a zombie, barely tasting my coffee and jumping every time the refrigerator hummed or a neighbor slammed the door. I had to get the mail on my way out to work, which is something I usually do without even thinking about it. I walked down to the bank of metal boxes near the lobby, shoved my key into the slot, and pulled out a small stack of bills and junk circulars. Tucked right in the middle of a grocery store flyer was a plain white business card made of heavy cardstock. It didn't have a company logo, a phone number, or even a name printed on it. I looked at the card and felt surprised when I saw the writing on the back. It showed the time I left the office and the time I arrived at the site, followed by the time I got back to my desk. There were no other words, just those 2 timestamps that made the room seem to spin. This meant he had seen me at the office and knew my schedule. I stood there for a few minutes looking at the card and realizing my workspace felt exposed. I went to work because I didn't know what else to do, but I spent the entire shift looking over my shoulder and jumping at shadows. My coworkers asked if I was feeling okay, and I just gave them some canned answer about not getting enough sleep, which was technically true. I couldn't bring myself to tell them the truth because it sounded so insane when I tried to say it out loud. How do you explain to someone that a man in a suit is stalking you with timestamps and business cards? It felt like something out of a bad movie, except the fear in my chest was very real and it wasn't going away. As evening approached, a strong sense of unease replaced my worry. I felt apprehensive about returning home, but also uneasy about being at the warehouse where someone might be observing the exit. I chose to stay at a friend's house in another part of town, mentioning a minor home repair to simplify things. After packing a small bag, I went to my car, carefully looking around the parking area for anyone suspicious or standing unusually still. The drive was normal, but I couldn't stop thinking about a particular card and the meaning of the times listed on it. When I got to my friend's place, I tried to relax, but every time his dog barked at a noise in the hallway, I felt like I was going to jump out of my skin. We watched some TV, and I tried to focus on the show, but my mind kept drifting back to the park and the sound of those dress shoes. I kept wondering how he found my address so quickly. Did he follow me home the night before without me seeing him? Or had he been watching me long before that Tuesday? The thought that this might have been going on for weeks without me noticing was almost worse than the encounter itself. I realized I didn't even know what the man's face looked like because I had been too scared to look directly at him. Around midnight, my phone buzzed on the coffee table, and for a second, I was too afraid to even pick it up. It was just a notification for a weather alert, but the brief flash of the screen made me realize I hadn't checked my doorbell camera at my own apartment yet. I have one of those cheap ones that records clips whenever it senses motion near the front door. I opened the app with shaking fingers, scrolling through the history of the last 24 hours, mostly seeing my neighbors or the mailman. Then, I saw a clip from 3:15 a.m., just a few hours after I had gotten home from the park. The video started with the hallway light flickering on as someone stepped into the frame. It was him, the man in the suit, standing right in front of my door with his back to the camera. He didn't knock or try to turn the handle. He just stood there for a full 3 minutes without moving a single muscle. Then, very slowly, he leaned forward until his forehead was almost touching the wood of my door, and he stayed like that for the remainder of the clip. He wasn't trying to get in. He was just listening to me breathe on the other side of the door. I felt a wave of nausea hit me as I watched the footage over and over again, trying to see any detail I might have missed. He never once turned around to face the camera, almost as if he knew exactly where it was and how to avoid it. The clip ended with him standing upright again, adjusting his tie, and then walking calmly out of the frame toward the stairs. I showed the video to my friend, and his face went just as pale as mine had been that morning. We both sat there in silence for a long time, the reality of the situation finally sinking in for both of us. I didn't go back to my apartment for the rest of the week, staying on my friend's couch and keeping the curtains drawn tight. I finally worked up the nerve to call the police, but the conversation was just as frustrating as I expected it to be. Since he hadn't actually broken in or threatened me verbally, they told me there wasn't much they could do besides file a report and suggest I look into a restraining order. They looked at the doorbell footage and the business card, but without a face or a name, the officer just sighed and told me to keep my doors locked. It felt like I was being told to just wait for something worse to happen before anyone would actually step in to help me. I returned to my apartment to gather more belongings and ensure everything was in order. My companion accompanied me. The hallway now felt unwelcoming and unnerving. Each turn brought a sense of apprehension, anticipating a figure in dark attire lurking nearby. We thoroughly searched the apartment, examining all areas. Everything appeared undisturbed, as if no one had entered. While this should have been reassuring, the recollection of a prior encounter made the experience feel intrusive. It was as if the space no longer felt entirely mine after that event. As we were leaving, I noticed something small tucked into the weather stripping at the very bottom of the door frame. It was another one of those plain white business cards, but this one didn't have timestamps on it. I picked it up and saw a single sentence written in that same neat blue ink. "You have a very quiet house." My stomach dropped, and I felt a physical sickness crawl up my throat as I realized he must have been standing there for a long time to know how much sound traveled through my walls. He wasn't just watching me at the park or in the hallway. He was studying the way I lived. I moved to a new location without telling my coworkers where I was. I bought a new car in a common color so it would not stand out. For a while, I thought my problems were over and no one knew where I was. I became more relaxed and slept well again, but I kept a safety item close. I felt I had achieved my goal by moving and changing my situation. That feeling of safety lasted until yesterday morning when I was walking to the bus stop near my new place. I was minding my own business, thinking about work, when I passed a man sitting on a bench near the corner. He was wearing a casual windbreaker and jeans, looking like any other person waiting for a ride, so I didn't think twice about him. But as I walked past, I heard the distinct sound of someone standing up and the rhythmic crunch of shoes on the sidewalk behind me. I froze for a second, my heart stopping in my chest. And that's when I heard a familiar voice whisper a 3-digit number, my new apartment number, right into my ear. I left without waiting for the bus and went to a busy coffee shop. I stayed there until evening. I am unsure how that person found me or what they want, but I know they are still present and observing. Each time I hear noises, I think it might be them. I am documenting this so others understand that sometimes pursuit is not about possessions or conflict. It can be about demonstrating the ability to locate someone regardless of their efforts to remain hidden. I'm moving again tomorrow, but I have a feeling it won't matter where I go. I just hope that this time I'm fast enough to see him before he sees me.